Welcome to the show. Well, for 100 years now, the National Park Service has been the primary caretaker of our national parks. Park Service staff, along with the help of volunteers and partners, has safeguarded these special places for generations of visitors. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome John Noel from the National Park Service. And I'm going to pass it over to Ron for the first question. Ron Bowers?
John, I had a chance yesterday to take a total tour of the canal in Richmond. And quite unique what I found. And to see our canal, which is a lot different than what it is in Richmond. Give us a little history about what the C&O Canal has done for us here in the Maryland area. And just in brevity, what's its advantage now as compared to when the railroads ran them out of business?
Okay. Well, the canal was originally established as a way to connect the burgeoning industrial communities that were on the East Coast and Washington, D.C. and Alexandria with the Ohio Valley. And to be able to take those goods that were like coal and wheat and flour, the bulky items, and be able to bring them reliably back through a cheaper transportation method. And canals were that proven technology at the time. So George Washington, it was actually his idea to develop that canal. And he developed that, and in 1828, they broke ground. And it took them until 1850 to actually complete it. And it ran for 100 years. And it competed fiercely with the railroads. In fact, what's interesting is on the very first day that they broke ground on the canal, they also broke ground at the same day in Baltimore with the railroad. Oh, wow. So at the time, the canalers thought that technology, which wasn't really that proven yet, the railroad technology, that they were way ahead of them, that they would never catch up. Well, as we come to know, that wasn't the case. So, but what it means now is to the community, we are a recreational resource. We are the teller of the stories, the themes that we tell to the public and share with people. And we are a historical park. So the themes that we talk about are westward expansion, which I shared. We also talk about industry. We talk about the Civil War. There's a lot of, we were the dividing line, the canal, during the Civil War for a long section in Maryland there. So we start in Washington, D.C., and we go all the way to Cumberland, 184.5 miles. Mm-hmm. And so there was lots of activity across there. But now it's the big driver and the meaning for the park now, I think, is the recreation, the respite, to be able to get away from the hustle and bustle, the nature that's available there, but also to the tourism. There's lots of people that come to the park as a result in all national parks. We had almost 5 million visitors that come to the C&O Canal every year. Wow. And the economic advantages in tourism is significant. In fact, I think the number is over $124 million a year in economic benefit related to tourism.
So wasn't the canal originally supposed to go to Pittsburgh? Is that true?
It was, and thus the name Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. And they went to the Ohio Valley in Pittsburgh, but they both started on the same day, both the railroad and the canal. And as they went along, the railroad, they were built on higher ground, and we came to some places. There's lots of stories about the challenges that they had in the competition. But the railroad, they got to Pittsburgh, they got to Cumberland first, and the canal essentially was out of it and knew it out of funds, and they stopped at Cumberland for that reason. And the railroad continued on to Pittsburgh. So.
Danielle?
You know, you had mentioned that the canal today is very much about recreation and nature, and I enjoy it myself with my family, biking and hanging out. And you know, a lot of times we've talked back and forth, well, I wonder what happened here back in those days. Can you tell us a little bit about what the common things that were hauled on the canal, and you know, expand on that a little bit?
Well, first of all, when the canal was in its heyday, there were over 500 canal boats operating at the same time up and down the length of the canal. And if you were to ride your bike and walk along that time, you'd be hard pressed not to step in some
Canal leftovers?
Yeah.
yes. But what you'd see is the canal boats were pulled by mules, and typically there would be 2 mules that would be pulling them, and they'd have backup mules that would be inside the boat. And so you'd see very quietly, there was no noise, it was just the quiet pulling of the boat by the mules. Wow. You would probably see one of the boatman's family, a child, that would be leading the mules. And the mom would most likely be inside tending to the animals or cooking a meal, and the dad would be help steering the boat. So you'd see that constant thing. If you came to a lock, there could be backups, just like we have now on the backups on 270 and 81 and such. There were backups at certain locks, and so you may wait a bit of a time as the other boats get locked through.
The original rush hour.
The original rush hour. But interestingly, you could also, when they came up upon a lock, they would blow a horn, and that would announce to the lock keeper that, hey, we're approaching, get ready. And then they would come out of their house and be ready, because it was all about speed and getting their inventory to market.
So did that happen, the locks, were they operational 24 hours a day?
They were.
Wow. That's a tough job.
Most of the boats operated from sunset, from sunup to sundown, but there were some people that went 24 hours a day.
But the lock tender had to be available
whenever the horn was blown. So it was a tough job.
Talk about your alarm clocks.
Yeah, right. So the canal, when it was operational, was it privately owned or was it publicly owned? And also, how much did it actually contribute to our local economy up in this area, especially like in Williamsport, when it was actually in operation?
So it was publicly owned.
Okay.
There were 3 main areas, 3 main kind of destinations along the canal. You had Georgetown, which was the final destination. Cumberland being the terminus where they got most of the coal and areas that were delivered into there out of the mines in western Maryland. And then there was Williamsport. Williamsport was situated about halfway. And so it was the central point for when they brought coal and flour and lumber down, but specifically coal. They would drop it off there, and then they would distribute it to central Maryland and to the railroad lines that connected it there to Baltimore and so forth. So it had a big place. Although there are lots of canal towns, its central location situated it well for that. And it was a driver to the economies. All of these towns sprung up as the canal and all of its commerce moved west. There also was a lot of technology used to do mills. The water from the canal created a reliable water source. So there was a lot of grinding of agricultural products to create flour and so forth.
As you go forward now, talking about the canal, I'm going to probably lump a couple questions into one. How was it built? What was the surface below the actual dirt that contains the water to keep the water from running out? And with the amount of flooding that takes place now and with the expansion of the river with a flood, how much are we really willing to put into the canals knowing that at some point in time what we do is going to be destroyed?
Good question. First of all, the canal was essentially hand dug and black powder. That's how they did it, using immigrant Irish laborers for the most part, and there were some Germans that were primarily the more skilled trades like stonemasons and such, but that's how it was built. And one of the interesting things I found is that one of the designs that were used in all the canals, the locking system was one designed by Leonardo da Vinci based on some of his designs, so a pretty smart guy. But the lining on the canal is clay, and that's what retains the water. The canal had to be alongside the Potomac because of the water source that it required. So there's various dams along the way and then locks that would bring water into it. So that's how the water was there. As far as the sustainability and do you make continued investment in the canal? Well, anything we do as park managers, we always look at sustainability. And we're always we try not to build things that are in the floodplain, or if we do it, we design it in such a way that it can withstand flooding and so forth. So those concerns are always taken into account. And we simply won't rebuild or renovate things that are in an area that is constantly being overflowed with water.
So obviously the technology today is a little better than it was back then, so we can mitigate some of those risks of the flooding, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So Slackwater was a major project that we'll get into in our next segment, but for now we're gonna hold John over for the next segment. Stay tuned though, because we've got a lot more about recent investment and perhaps even upcoming investment in the canal. Please stay tuned. We're back in 3 minutes.